Hello folks, I'm Alex, this is Alex Unabridged, and this is the 27 Club book tag. So welcome back to the channel if that is the case. Yes, Tag Tuesday, time for a tag. And this is the 27 Club book tag. I was tagged by Mr Troy Tradup, thank you very much for that, Troy. And this was originally created by Celeste over at Bookbound Weirdo. I will link to both of those videos in the description. So yes, this is one based around musicians. Musicians who are members of the 27 Club, which I had to look up. I didn't know anything about. And these are all musicians who died at the age of 27. It's quite a strange sort of little bit of lore, I guess, myth around the 27 Club. So check it out if you don't know anything about it, like I didn't. So let's get straight into the prompts then. And the first one is Robert Johnson, who is of course an early bluesman. And the prompt for this is a book or a character that started it all. I'm not sure what the it of started it all is, but for me I'm going to go with characters, a book, author that started off my love of horror. And of course that is going to be a Stephen King. It's The Shining, which is the first Stephen King. And to go, you know, sort of really niche within that, in the characters, well, to start with, there's the lady in room 217. I think he's called Mrs Massey. So the dead lady in the bathtub. And mainly, the reason for this is because I think this is the first instance that I can remember of reading a scene with a character, an entity, anything like that in it, that scared the hell out of me, but that I really enjoyed. If I'd have seen that in a film or TV show, you know, if that had been a visual thing, that scare, that horror, it would have been too much for me. I didn't and still don't like scary movies, etc. They're too scary for me. But I remember that scene with Danny in and Mrs Massey in room 217 being terrifying, but really thoroughly enjoying being scared by it. And whilst we're talking about Danny, Danny is one of my favourite characters. Again, I think possibly because he was one of the first that I really kind of sort of connected with, and certainly in horror. And it's also the start of me kind of loving what Stephen King can do or has been able to do with child characters. You know, it doesn't always hit the mark these days, but certainly with somebody like Danny Torrance, the way that you are seeing the world, if you like, the environment, the happenings through Danny's eyes. And the fact that Danny is quite a special kid in his, you know, kind of ability to shine, that was just wonderful. I just loved that, and it connected me to the book, especially because I wasn't a little kid obviously when I read it, but I was a teenager. I was like probably 15, 16, something like that, and so the age gap wasn't as big as it would be now, but it, you know, there was a real kind of connection to Danny Torrance and the way that King writes that character, and, as I say, other kids. So yeah, that whole book, but particularly Danny Torrance in it, and the lady in room 217, were the start of my love of Stephen King, but my love of horror, and my realisation that horror fiction was my way into the genre. That it didn't matter if I was too scared or didn't want to be that scared by horror movies, because horror fiction was where I found the real joy of that stuff. Okay, prompt number 2 then. is Janis Joplin, and this is a book that celebrates the beauty of imperfection. I'm going to dip into my art-related books for this one, and go with Perfection, the aptly titled book by James Victory, who is a designer, an artist and designer. And this is subtitled Dangerous Ideas on the Business of Life. And yeah, this is basically all about, you know, moving away from the idea of perfection in your work, and about the beauty of imperfection, and the beauty of, you know, kind of putting yourself and all of your flaws, technical and otherwise, into your work, that there's a humanity that comes across, that there's a connection that comes across when you allow yourself to just be authentic in your work and not constantly striving for this unattainable idea of something that is perfect. This obviously is looking at art and design, but I think that goes for anything really. Perfection is unobtainable. I am admittedly guilty, very guilty of being a perfectionist, and this book particularly, amongst others, but this one in particular, has given me quite a lot of things to kind of like hold on to in terms of when I'm getting down on myself because I'm worrying that my work isn't good enough, or that it isn't clean enough, or that it isn't, you know, perfect. I can go back to this and I can read some of James's ideas and kind of philosophies, essentially. This is kind of a philosophy for his art, for his design, and it's just really, really useful. And you know, he's quite sarcastic as well. He's funny, and he's got an interesting mind. I definitely will say that. And you know, he's a successful artist and designer and speaker and writer. And yeah, it's full of kind of, it's got some sort of, you know, sort of visual stuff in it, but it is largely text-based stuff. It is largely written, and so yeah, this is a really useful book, not just for my artwork, but just, you know, life in general. Okay, prompt number 3 then is Jimi Hendrix. Gotta love a bit of Jimi Hendrix. A book that never reads the same twice. I'm going to dip into my plays for this and go to one of my favourite playwrights, and that is with Sarah Kane, and I've picked this one, which is 448 Psychosis. This is Kane's last play before she took her own life. And this one I've picked because it is, whilst it is a play, it is meant to be performed. It has so like little structure to it, like certainly in terms of, you know, it doesn't read like a play text like you'd expect. There's no stage or very little in terms of stage directions. It reads more like a poem in a lot of ways, and it's quite abstract, it's quite surreal in a lot of places, and it's one that whenever I read it, I get something different out of it. I also see it differently in terms of how I would produce it. I have produced this in part. I didn't produce the entire thing. It was a kind of an abridged version. But yeah, I directed it. It was my idea to do it, and I directed it, but it was very much a team effort with the cast. It was very much based around collaboration and everybody bringing their own kind of spin to it, because it is such a difficult one to pin down in a lot of ways. It's definitely got some clear themes in it. I mean, the title 448 Psychosis apparently is meant to refer to the time in the morning, as in 4:48 a.m, when Kane experienced kind of her worst and darkest periods of mental health, mental illness and psychosis. There's a lot of debate around this about whether it was kind of really too much of a kind of a theatrical suicide note, if you like. I don't think it is. I think it is about it's about discussion around mental illness from a very personal perspective. But yeah, it's a difficult one, but all of Kane's work is difficult. All of it's difficult. But yeah, this one, I never read it the same twice. I never see it the same way, on each reread. And I've read it quite a lot because I've studied Kane and written on Kane and stuff like that before when I was a postgrad student. So yeah, very interesting piece. Not an easy one, but definitely one that makes you think. Okay then, prompt number 4 is Jim Morrison of The Doors, and this is a book that explores themes of death and rebirth. Do you know what? I couldn't think of anything that I've read that really explores that theme, but I was in the library the other day and I saw a book on the shelves that reminded me that it's one that I want to read, that I've had on my list for a while, and that is More Than This by Patrick Ness, which I think is pitched as a YA novel, but from what I hear has kind of, it's got a lot to it for a YA novel. And this revolves, or this, the start of it, the premises of it is we meet a boy who is drowning. He's alone in his final moments. He dies, and then he wakes. He's injured. He's thirsty, but he's alive. And this seems to be centered around the question of what happens next, whether there's more to death than just the grave, and how death might affect the dead as well as the living. It sounds very much like it's an existential exploration, and that it's kind of challenging our expectations about life and death as readers. So yeah, it sounds like it's potentially got quite a clever way of exploring sort of ideas, thoughts around death and rebirth. And I love a bit of existentialism. I like the philosophy, as in to read the philosophy. I've read some of it before, but I find it very difficult in its kind of raw form, if you like, from the philosophers. And I found it a lot more accessible when it comes to kind of it being worked into a novel, and certainly if it's being worked into a YA novel, I think there could be some really interesting discussion, really interesting ways of exploring some of this kind of philosophy. So we'll I'll get to that at some stage, but yeah, that's one that I've had on my list for a while that I think could be quite an interesting read. Okay then, prompt number 5 is Amy Winehouse. A book or character that deserves huge apology from everyone. There's quite a few I could have picked for this, because I think, of all the characters I can think of that fit into that sort of classification, that idea, they're all female characters who have essentially been portrayed as mad, portrayed as crazy, when actually I think their reaction to their situation is probably quite reasonable based on their treatment. But Shakespeare's got quite a few of them we could pick from, let's face it, Ophelia. But the one that I've picked is one that I read recently, and that is the narrator, the unnamed narrator from The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. So the narrator in this gets confined to, I think, the old nursery of her house for a rest cure, which was a commonly prescribed kind of treatment, if you like, for women suffering from depression at the time. And I think it's postnatal depression that this particular character is suffering from. And she's forbidden by concerned doctors, her husband, etc., to basically do anything, including, writing, occupying her mind in any way. She's just got to rest and do nothing. and of course becomes wildly understimulated as she's staring at these four walls, and she starts hallucinating some pretty disturbing stuff to do with the wallpaper. It becomes obsessive about the yellow wallpaper. And by the end of the story, you know, she's eating the wallpaper, she's creeping around on hands and knees, she's refusing to leave the room, she's certainly extremely obsessed with this wallpaper and the things that she's seeing in it. And I think just like, if you hadn't locked her away, she wouldn't have got into that position. She didn't need locking away, she needed help. And that was not helping. She's, her reaction to that confinement is to be expected, I think, given the situation. Okay then, prompt number 6 is Brian Jones. Is that the Rolling Stones, I think? Correct me if I'm wrong. And this is a book that's surrounded by conspiracy theories. I don't think I've actually ever read a book that has kind of conspiracy theories about it, surrounding it, but I have read a few that are about or involve conspiracy theories. And the one that I've picked is one of my favourites, and that is Umberto Eco's Foucault's Pendulum. This is a cracker of a book, this is. This is a quite a complex novel, fiendishly so at times, which weaves in a huge array of esoteric conspiracies. So you've got the Freemasons in there, you've got the Illuminati, you've got Opus Dei, you've got kind of, mythologies surrounding sort of Ark of the Covenant, you've got loads of stuff. Plus, you've got the spoof conspiracy that is in here, which is called The Plan, which is created by the 3 publishers that are kind of our primary protagonists. One in particular who's the sort of real primary protagonist. They find that their invention, this plan, this conspiracy, gains a mysterious life of its own. There are some sort of similarities in some respects to, like, say, the Da Vinci Code, but Eco's stuff is like way more sophisticated. Not that I disliked the Da Vinci Code, great romp of a book. But this is a whole different ball game. This is the other end of the spectrum. Da Vinci Code is kind of what I think of as like an airport novel. It's a fast-paced, quick, it's like action and all that kind of stuff. This is a slow read, largely because the language is difficult in it, and also it's just so much more complex in terms of keeping track of things in it. But it shows. It definitely shows sort of how conspiracy theories can seduce both kind of gullible and skeptical folks alike. It's just a really interestingly woven story, masterfully done, and I love it. It's my favourite Eco, and this one's on my top 10 books of all time, favourite books of all time. So yeah, Foucault's Pendulum. Okay, prompt number 7 is Alan Wilson of Canned Heat. I love a bit of Canned Heat. So this is a book that contributed to the popularization of its genre. This one was a bit of an easier one for me to think of. And this one is Rosemary's Baby by Ira Levin. So this was 1967. And this was the catalyst for a horror boom in the latter part of the 20th century. It's kind of using both Gothic elements of Gothic literary tradition, but also like with modern day setting and things like it's looking at things like the horror of domesticity and the mundane. And we're following a young aspiring couple, just about to move into their first apartment in this lovely New York apartment block. it's very much more psychological. There's these strange neighbours who are kind of inserting themselves into Rosemary and Guy's lives, and it's just, there's an undertone throughout it. It's not a fast-paced book at all. It's very much a slow burn, but it's like the horror, the psychological horror, the unsettling kind of tone to it is just constant throughout. It never really lets up, but as I say, it's subtle, so it just kind of builds, and it builds on this tension, and the sort of, as I say, the psychological horror of it for Rosemary. I think it's absolutely brilliant. It's the first time I read it this year, and I absolutely loved it, and I'm going to be reading some more Ira Levin based on the fact that I love this so much. So yeah, absolute classic, and certainly a hugely influential horror novel, psychological horror novel, that really kind of went on to open the floodgates for so much of what we saw in the latter half of the 20th century. Okay, prompt number 8 then, and that is Pete Ham, and that is a book that challenges the notion of loyalty. This was quite a difficult one to think of, actually, and the only one that I could come up with is Cemetery Boys by Aidan Thomas, because of what I find interesting about this one is the ideas around wanting to remain loyal to family, to tradition particularly, but at the same time be faithful, loyal to yourself, and kind of having to forge a path where those two things don't actually necessarily mesh together that well, because this is about a young trans guy called Yadriel, who is member of a family and a community that all of which are brujo, so essentially witches, practitioners of witchcraft, and the family and the tradition kind of dictates certain things based on your gender, and Yadriel is kind of fighting against that because he's wanting to transition, but he also wants to remain a member of the community, and he wants to be treated as a brujo. He wants to be treated, as any male would be treated within that society. But there's the theme of that kind of like navigation between those two needs for particular loyalties is quite interesting. And so and there's loyalty through friendship as well, via a ghost that he accidentally summons, Julian, and that sort of element dips into sort of loyalty to clan again, to kind of like to found family, things like that, and kind of split loyalties, I guess, and how to find that middle ground. So yeah, that was it. It definitely was an interesting one. That's something that I certainly took away from it. But yeah, so Cemetery Boys by Aidan Thomas. That was the one I came up with for that one. Okay, and then last prompt is prompt number 9, and that is Kurt Cobain, a book that could pass for a humble old sweater, but is a total legend. And I'm going to go for one of my recent reads for this, and that is A Psalm for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers. And this is a total legend, certainly to me. This is it's a short book. It's a very sweet story. It's set, in a kind of a very lovely, almost cozy kind of utopian world, where you've got some really lovely people, and kind of it's like a snuggly sweater in that respect. But the conversations that the discussion that happens through the book, if you like, the themes that emerge, the ideas, and just the general kind of feeling of it, the tone of it, are just brilliant. It had such an impact on me, and it was exactly what I needed at the time. You know, I read a lot of horror, I read a lot of dark stuff, and I like that. That's what I like. I like mind-boggling stuff as well, you know, sci-fi stuff. But this book was just like, as I say, it wasn't that it was lightweight. There was plenty of stuff in it, and just so much stuff that resonated, and I kind of felt very seen through this. And yeah, just fair play to Becky Chambers for this one, because she just like she hit the mark, absolutely. And so for me, this is one I had it out the library, and usually I wouldn't buy a book that I've already read, but this one is on my Christmas list just because I want a copy of it in the house at all times. And I want the second one as well. I really, really, really want to read the second one, which is I can't remember what it's called now, A Prayer for the Crown Shy, I believe. So yeah, I want to see more of that world and more of those characters. So yeah, for me, that's a total legend, because I went into it kind of wanting quite a cozy story, wanting quite a nice story, and that's what I got. But I got a lot more than that, a hell of a lot more than that out of it as well. So yes, that's my pick for the final one. Okay, so the last thing left to do then is just to tag some folks. So I will tag 3 people for this. Apologies if you've already been tagged. I will tag Crystal at Fibre Artsy. I'll tag Michael Romeo Talks Books, and I will also tag Punk Rock Cereal Bowl, seeing as this one is music related. So yes, so that is my response for the 27 Club book tag. Thank you very much for watching, folks. As always, do let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please do consider giving me a like and subscribing for more content coming very soon. But from me, for now, that's ta-ra.